Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and online audience, for your interest in our special event of AVI. This is our first time to organize this kind of event called book launching, because our strategic advisor, Dr. Chun Buran Chanburai, just published his book on Cambodia-China strategy. The publisher is Routledge, is one of the top international publishers especially on strategic security studies of the Asia Pacific regions. And we have great honor to have Dr. Chun Buran Chanburai today with us. Unfortunately, we could do it virtually only because of COVID-19, and the book has not arrived Cambodia yet. So if you would like to purchase the book, I think you need to purchase it online via Amazon. And of course, I think today discussion, Dr. Boré will highlight some of the key points of his book. So first of all, Dr. Chun Buran Chanburai, please tell us a bit on the background of your book. Why did you choose this topic for the first place?
Thank you, Dr. Chien Vanret, for organizing this virtual book launch. And thank you, the audience, for your interest in the book. Some have already approached me to purchase the book, but as Dr. Vanret has just mentioned, the book have not arrived in Cambodia yet. But I have already requested Routledge to have some kinds of distribution of the book in Cambodia. With regard to the book, actually it was based on my PhD dissertation that I've done in Australia under the 4-year Endeavour Scholarship from the Australian government. I was very fortunate to join the Strategic and Defense Studies Center at the National University at the Australian National University from 2015 to 2019. It was a long journey and painful, of course. Doing PhD is not easy, but I could survive thanks to full support and wise guidance from my supervisor, Professor Leszek Buczynski, and other advisors, including Professor Evelyn Go, Professor Helen James, and many other faculty members and staff at the Strategic Studies Center, Strategic and Defense Studies Center. And I'm also wish to express my appreciation to AVI, a newly established think tank in Cambodia, and of course, the first homegrown think tank in the kingdom, for kind support extended to me to turn my PhD dissertation into this book. Now, why Cambodia-China relations? I think the research was based on my long interest in China's influence in Southeast Asia. I wrote my master thesis when I was doing my master in diplomacy in Thailand on China's soft power in Southeast Asia. So through that, it built out my interest in China's relation with Southeast Asia, including Cambodia. And during my second master in public diplomacy at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy in conjunction with Harvard Kennedy School, I wrote another attachment paper related to how Southeast Asia respond to security challenges in the Asia Pacific, especially towards great powers in the region. So those are two papers that motivated me to further study and research on China's and Southeast Asia, especially China and Cambodia. 2012 was another milestone that further motivated me to focus on Cambodia's relations with China. Because of many news headlines that ran unfair coverages of Cambodia, mainly because of the failure of ASEAN foreign ministers to issue the joint communique during the Cambodia-ASEAN Chairmanship in July 2012, also widely known as the Phnom Penh fiasco. Promptly after the fiasco, Cambodia was unfairly seen as a proxy of China in Southeast Asia. But the developments further motivated me to study in this bilateral relationship of my puzzles in the bilateral relationship. And prior to the conduct of the research, I had three main research puzzles on Cambodia's China relation. First, as you all know, Prime Minister Hun Sen's mistrust of Beijing was profound previously due to China's support for the Khmer Rouge, its close tie with the Cambodia royal family during and after the Civil War, especially from late 1970 to 1993. Tellingly, Prime Minister Hun Sen's political essay in 1988 suggests that China was the root of all that was evil in Cambodia. So why China's influence in Cambodia in particular and in Southeast Asia in general has been very profound and rapid. So this is my first research puzzle. And Prime Minister Hun Sen and other CPP leaders also declared that China is Cambodia's most trustworthy friend. So why? What are the compelling factors that have changed their perception toward China from mistrust to trust? My second puzzle has something to do with IO theory. The structural realist school of thought suggests that states, including small ones, tend to readjust their foreign policy in accordance with the structural changes at the systemic level. And in Southeast Asia, China's rise prompted many ASEAN member states to readjust or to revigorate their strategic direction by strengthening their defense capability, creating the regional security cooperation frameworks, including the establishment of ASEAN Regional Forum in 1994. But unlike the rest of the region, Cambodia's response to China profoundly changed later on, not because of the structural changes, but because of domestic dynamics and because of the changes in terms of security perception in its neighborhoods, meaning in the Mekong sub-region. I think there are two milestones that drive Cambodia's strategic direction toward China. Number one, political crisis in July 1997 between the CPP and the Funcinpec royalists at that time. And the second other, I think it's more important milestone is the border dispute between Cambodia and Thailand from 2008 to 2011. Then two events, changed Cambodia's relation with China. The third puzzle is that after joining ASEAN in 1999, the regional grouping became the cornerstone of Cambodia's foreign policy. Cambodian leaders were strongly convinced that ASEAN would play an important role in helping Cambodia to promote its economic development, to safeguard its sovereignty and territorial integrity. So the puzzle is how Cambodia could balance between regionalism anchoring on ASEAN on the one hand, and its strategic alignment with China on the other hand. And the balancing act has been very difficult because of the disagreement and sometimes confrontation between some ASEAN member states and China, particularly on the South China Sea. So those are the three main research puzzles that drove me to work further on Cambodia's strategic direction towards China.
Thank you. A very interesting journey. I think in total, perhaps you spent about 8 years, right, investigating this topic from your time at the university in Thailand, and then Singapore, and then 4 years in Canberra. So perhaps total years that you spend on this work about 8 years. Well, I think 8 years perhaps give you sufficient time to go to the bottom, of the issue, right? To unpack some of these puzzles and provide certain degrees of explanations using different concepts and facts to explain the case. In other words, to provide a clearer picture of Cambodia-China strategy. My next question regarding, you mentioned earlier about this kind of balancing act, which is you think it's very difficult between, on the one hand is the norms and institution building through ASEAN, and the other hand is strategic alignment with external or regional powers. In this case, it's China. So can you share with us more on this, and how has Cambodia done so far to balance this between these two, China and ASEAN?
Thank you, Dr. Wanrat, for this interesting conceptual question. In order to answer the research questions and to address the puzzles, I consulted a great deal with literature on small state and small state foreign policy, especially on the strategic options available for small state. I did some research on alliance, alignment, balancing versus bargaining, hedging strategy, neutrality and non-alignment, and of course, regionalism and the construction of regional collective security. But I found that those strategic options have been more or less adopted by Cambodian leaders through generations. And in order to dig down this conceptual framework, I think we have to go back to the long history of Cambodia's search for security and survival, especially since the collapse of the Khmer Empire in 1431. And I remember a statement by the former Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, who once said that history is the memory of states, which bears heavily on the future national decisions. So national decisions are more or less based on historical memory of the state. So this, compelled me to study a long history of Cambodia in order to comprehend Cambodia's past strategic options. B, to answer why those options were selected by Cambodian leaders. And C, are those strategic options and compelling factors shaping those options remain or still relevant in explaining Cambodia's current foreign policy direction. You might know that after the collapse of the Khmer Empire, Khmer kings and strategists tried to play off neighbors, one neighbor against the other. And after that, we opted a French protectorate from 1863 until 1953. And after the independence, our late King Father, King Norom Sihanouk, adopted the foreign policy of neutrality and non-alignment, with some successes and some painful failure. And during the Cold War, we didn't really have clear strategic vision and clear strategic options. In this period, I call the dangerous strategic illusion of Khmer leaders, the Lon Nol regime and the Pol Pot regime. And after the Civil War, Cambodia adopted again the fundamental principles of its foreign policy based on neutrality, and in a new context, the context of globalization, the context of regionalism. So I call it neutrality and international engagement. Now, it's very a difficult journey for Cambodia, and I try to draw some good lessons from the history of Cambodia, especially from 1431 until the contemporary one. And there are at least 5 good experience or lesson learned that we can draw. Number one, Cambodia's history and geography of being sandwiched by 2 bigger neighbors have always been a compelling factors shaping Cambodia's strategic direction. Second, in order to deal with the first factor, whenever necessary and available, Cambodian leaders tend to seek support and assistance from external powers. So promoting strategic alignment with external powers is not something new. It's been within our diplomatic condition. Third, besides domestic political dynamics, strategic choices that Cambodia selected depended on the distribution of power in Asia, and more importantly, the distribution of power in the Mekong sub-region. So, you know, geopolitical dynamics in this part of the world influences a great deal on Cambodia's strategic direction. Fourth, it's a very painful lesson learned. Whatever strategic options we adopted, there were always costs for this small state. We have to pay the cost for whatever strategic options. And the last one, it's related to Cambodia-China relations. In the early stage, China's role has been less significant. However, in the post-independence Cambodia, China has always been crucial for Cambodia's strategic direction during the Cold War and at the moment. So this is a long history of Cambodia's strategic direction in its quest for prosperity, security, and above all, survival as a state.
Thanks. You mentioned about back a bit to the 1960s that Cambodia tried to maintain this kind of independent, neutral foreign policy. In the mid-1960s, Prince Norodom Sihanouk wrote an essay on in the foreign affairs on Cambodia foreign policy. He said in the article that neutrality is a matter of necessity. It's not a matter of choice. And then, of course, Cambodia failed due to external pressures, especially from major powers.
Yeah.
And looking at the current state of Cambodia foreign policy, you think that neutrality is a matter of necessity or a matter of choice?
It's a very tough question. It hit on the nail of Cambodia's foreign policy for centuries. I do agree with our late King Father. Neutrality and non-alignment were the matter of necessity, not of choice, and they remained the matter of necessity, not of choice. But I think during the Cold War, during the Sangkum Rinayum period, neutrality and non-alignment can be understood as walking a fine line between the Eastern Bloc, led by the former Soviet Union, and the Western Bloc, led by the United States. So if it is the case, neutrality could be understood as balancing strategy against risk by not taking side, by playing one rival against other. But neutrality and non-alignment at the moment might have similar elements, but might entail different elements because the contexts are absolutely different. Although people are not talking about the new Cold War, but the new Cold War is not the Cold War in the past. It's not about ideological competition. It's more or less about geopolitical rivalry, the competition for ideas rather than ideology, the quest for technological superiority, but not less on arms race during the old Cold War. So Cambodia might have more room for maneuver, more room to exert its neutrality and non-alignment. Plus, as I mentioned earlier, international engagement. So our neutrality must be flexible, must be nuanced in order to respond to the new context of the international politics of the 21st century. So in brief, to answer your question, neutrality and non-alignment remain the matter of necessity for Cambodia's continued quest for prosperity and security, as well as survival in the 21st century.
Thanks. In your book, you have this kind of argument, which I find it very interesting. You state about delicate hedging strategy should be adopted. Why you need to add adjective delicate to the hedging strategy for Cambodian foreign policy?
I'm not really a fan of hedging strategy, to be honest. Although one of my advisors, Professor Evelyn Go, is one of the leading scholars in hedging strategy. To me, the word hedging is very unclear and lack of concrete actions. According to Professor Go, hedging can be defined as a set of strategies aimed at avoiding or planning for contingencies in a situation in which states cannot decide upon more straightforward alternatives, either balancing or bargaining or neutrality. So it can be everything in between. Professor Cheng Hui in Malaysia proposed that hedging strategy covers a broad range of strategic options, from economic pragmatism, binding engagement, limited bargaining, or dominance denied strategy, and indirect balancing or soft balancing. So it is the case, it can be any options. But Cambodia's relation towards China are more unambiguous, much clearer, because China is one of the most important strategic partners. We don't see China as a threat, but a potential offshore balancing for us against security risk and for economic prosperity. So the choice is very clear. China is one of the most important strategic partners, if not the most important strategic partners. But we also understand that Cambodia's relations with China are asymmetric between a small state and a great power, in which small state, is pretty sure that will experience more risk, more challenges, more vulnerabilities compared to the great power. And the risk challenges include over-reliance. People talk about economic over-reliance on China or debt trap diplomacy, the erosion of Cambodia's foreign policy autonomy, the possible abandonment, the entrapment into great powers rivalry, the alienation in the face of other major powers, and of course alienation towards our neighbors. So those are risks and challenges. So because of the recent challenges, we cannot promote our strategic alignment only with China. We need to diversify our foreign relations to other major powers. We need to engage in the building of a regional collective security, especially in ASEAN-led security frameworks, in order to address risks and challenges from our close alignment with China. And I use the word alignment with clear purpose. It's not an alliance, but an alignment, political statement rather than military pact. Now, but the diversification of Cambodia's foreign policy must be delicate, must be careful, not to badly impact Cambodia's relation with China, which I consider the most important bilateral relationship. To sum up, China, I'm here very undiplomatic because I'm here as an academic researcher. So I would like to be frank and honest in the sense that China is the most important strategic partner of Cambodia, but it must not the only strategic partner for the kingdom.
Thank you. You mentioned several times in your book about performance-based legitimacy, that one of the compelling factors of Cambodia-China strategy. Can elaborate a bit more for our audience today? What do you mean by performance-based legitimacy?
I think you mentioned the chapter that I emphasized the important roles of China for Cambodia from a political perspective, economic perspective, and of course, strategic point of view. I think economically, China has been the most important economic and trade partner of Cambodia. As of 2014, China became Cambodia's largest investor and economic benefactor. And so China is the largest source of foreign direct investment, or FDI, in Cambodia. And since 2016, China has become the largest source of foreign tourist visitors in the kingdom. China has also played a leading role in infrastructure development, connectivity of Cambodia. And the important role, economic role of China has been reinforced after President Xi Jinping announced the creation of the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013. So these Chinese engagements enable the ruling party, the CPP, to maintain and promote economic development, job and employment generations, the upgradation of infrastructure and connectivity in the kingdom. And these achievements have the ruling party to promote legitimacy and popularity among Cambodian voters. The ruling party has been prioritized on its political platform on economic development and prosperity. This is the rationale behind my argument that China's economic engagement in Cambodia has helped the ruling party to maintain and promote its performance-based legitimacy. Not to mention the importance of China in Phnom Penh's strategic outlook. As I argued earlier, the study of Cambodia's foreign policy needs to reflect its history. And one of the lessons learned is that seeking external support has been a crucial element of Cambodia's diplomatic tradition. And China appears to be one of the most, if not the most important strategic partner for Cambodia, as I alluded to earlier, due to the conviction that the future of Asia will be written primarily by China's rise. Cambodian leaders and strategists are quite pessimistic about American primacy in the Asia Pacific. To be blunt, to them, the Pax Americana is over. A regional order is emerging in Asia and the Pacific. And China has been and will be playing an important role in the newly emerging regional order. Therefore, I believe that Cambodian leaders want their country to be on the right side of the history of the 21st century in Asia and the Pacific. And we used to be on the wrong side. We don't want to be on the wrong side again. So those are roles of China in the eyes of Cambodian leaders and strategists.
Thanks. You in the thesis you also have a discussion on ASEAN, Cambodian engagement in ASEAN, and you also talk about the important role of ASEAN in shaping regional order, especially in promoting what you call a rule-based regional order, rule-based regional order in the region. How do you define rule-based regional order in this regard?
A rules-based regional order is a very vague term. Literally, it refers to a stability or order that is based on shared values, shared norms, and shared expectation on what international relations should be conducted. And when we talk about the rules-based regional order in our part of the world, we tend to think of ASEAN centrality, the central role of ASEAN in promoting multilateral cooperation or multilateral diplomacy, in promoting shared regional norms and values, and in socializing those norms and values vis-a-vis regional and external powers. And ASEAN has been able to do so because it is the most successful regional grouping outside Western Europe. Since the establishment of ASEAN in 1967, the region enjoyed a relative peace. ASEAN has been able to transform the region from the so-called the Balkan of Asia to the island of peace. ASEAN's regional integration also helped the region to enjoy rapid economic growth for many decades. And second, ASEAN has been the convening power in multilateral diplomacy in Asia and the Pacific. ASEAN has created a lot of cooperation mechanisms from the AOF that I mentioned in 1994, ASEAN Plus 3 in 1997, with Japan, South Korea, and China, East Asia Summit in 2005 with the Plus 3 country, and India, Australia, New Zealand, and later on Russia and United States joined in 2011. The creation of defense cooperation through ADM Plus, so on and so forth. So such convening powers, enable ASEAN to be part and parcel of the so-called rules-based regional order. Last but not least, I think it is because of geopolitics among major powers. Major powers in the region do not trust one another. The Japanese do not trust the Chinese, and likewise, the Indians do not trust the Chinese, and likewise. Because of mistrust among major power, they have provided a driving seat to ASEAN to steer the building of regional order. And they are comfortable in working with ASEAN because ASEAN is not a threat to them. And ASEAN has promoted certain norms and rules that are comfortable to all major powers. And those rules and norms are sometimes called the ASEAN way. So this is what I see the rules-based regional order in the Asia Pacific.
Thanks for that. You dedicate one chapter talking about Cambodia relation with other kind of key partners.
Dr. Wanred, before moving to great powers, if I may, I would like to add the importance of ASEAN for Cambodia. I think it's very important. It's one of the 3 research puzzles that I had prior to the conduct of my research. As I mentioned, after joining ASEAN in 1999, the regional grouping became immediately the cornerstone of Cambodia's foreign policy. And I use the cornerstone of Cambodia's foreign policy. Because our belief and confidence in ASEAN's important role for our security, for our prosperity, and for our integration to the broader world. However, Cambodia's relations with ASEAN have not always been rosy. We have a hiccup when Cambodia and Thailand embroiled in the border dispute from 2008 to 2011. ASEAN's response to the border dispute did not meet the expectation of Cambodian leaders. Therefore, Phnom Penh seemed to lose certain confidence and trust on ASEAN. Because border dispute with Thailand had profound impacts on strategic directions of Cambodia, away from ASEAN regionalism, from my own personal observation. As I mentioned, ASEAN became the cornerstone of Cambodia's foreign policy. But because the feeling that Cambodia cannot rely on ASEAN, when we are bullied, we are intimidated by other ASEAN member states, the trust that we have in ASEAN seem to gradually fade away. So the border disputes had 3 fundamental implications for Cambodia. Number 1, it reminded Cambodian leaders that our neighbors remained intimidating, bullying, and to put it more bluntly, remained security threat to Cambodia's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Number 2, Cambodia's confidence in ASEAN has been misplaced. And third, the 2 factors seem to push Cambodia toward a closer strategic alignment with external powers. And China seems to be the first and most important choice in Cambodia's strategic alignment with major powers.
Thanks.
Having said that, ASEAN remains very crucial, and there is a national consensus on the important role of ASEAN. Although it's no longer the cornerstone of Cambodia's foreign policy, the majority of the Cambodian foreign policy community still believe that it remains one of the cornerstones of Cambodia's foreign policy.
Thanks for that. Yes, you reinforce your argument that one of the compelling factors of Cambodia-China strategy is the threat imposed by the two big neighbors, Thailand and Vietnam. And the border clashes in 2008 to 2008 and 11 was the most important factor shaping Cambodia's strategic alignment with China. So based on Cambodia kind of threat or risk perceptions. And of course, the border issue with Vietnam, perhaps you also mentioned in your book that the border dispute or perhaps future tension, especially when we come to maritime boundary with Vietnam, can be also a compelling factor for Cambodia-China strategy. Anyway, I just would like to go back to your chapter on Cambodia strategic option, limited strategic option with other major powers. You put Japan first, and then the United States second in Cambodia, a kind of strategic diversification strategy. Can you elaborate on this chapter? What are the role of Japan in helping Cambodia to implement this kind of delicate hedging strategy, as you mentioned in your book? Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Van Rett. What prompted me to write the chapter, it was my questioning on the roles of other major powers for Cambodia. So before I started writing the chapter, I asked the question, besides China, who else could provide the same or similar support and assistance for Cambodia's economic development, social progress, security, and above all, survival. So I started to look at the role of Japan. And I think that Japan has been one of the most important strategic partners of Cambodia. Japan has played a crucial role in the post-conflict Cambodia since the early 1990s or the late 1980s. Economically, Japan has been one of the biggest donors of Cambodia. Japan plays a very important role in promoting foreign direct investment in Cambodia. I think ranked number 2 at the moment. Politically, Tokyo's support is instrumental for the ruling CPP. As among the Cambodians, Japan's image is more positive than China's when it comes to the issues of democracy, human rights, good governance, the rule of law. Strategically, I think Japan is Cambodia's most important hedging power against risk, uncertainties deriving from Cambodia's close alignment with China. As I mentioned earlier, there are certain risks and challenges deriving from Cambodia's close relation with China, and Japan can provide opportunity or potential for Cambodia to hedge against those risks and uncertainty. And that's why Cambodian leaders upgraded Cambodia-Japan bilateral relationship into a strategic partnership in 2013. So Japan became the second strategic partner of Cambodia after China. And Cambodian leaders also have also provided certain strategic assets to the Japanese, like Sihanouk Port, the only one deep sea port in Cambodia. It has been under the management by JICA, Japanese International Cooperation Agency, since 1999. So Japan provides a very exemplified illustration that Cambodia does diversify its foreign relations to other major powers in the region. I think we also support Japan's permanent membership in the United Nations Security Council. Prime Minister Hun Sen was the first head of state in Southeast Asia who publicly supported Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. So if Cambodia is a proxy of China, as some argue, a regional rival of China on many occasions, on many important roles, like the permanent membership in the UNSC, free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, which has been widely seen as an initiative to compete with China's BRI, Belt and Road Initiative.
Thank you. You also have very interesting argument in your book that small state kind of relation with great power, it is not a matter of goodwill, but it is a matter of relevance. It's, how do we matter to them, right?
Yeah.
So can you explain how does Cambodia matter to China? How does Cambodia matter to Japan?
No, I think to illustrate the validity of the point, I think we should look at Cambodia's relation with the United States instead. Because it has been argued that Cambodia should adopt a more balanced foreign policy toward China and the United States. But I am quite convinced that such approach is inconceivable, at least in the near future, due to three main reasons. And one of the reasons is also related to what you have raised, the importance of Cambodia in the eyes of American foreign policy makers. Now, the three reasons include one, there have been a growing perception that the United States is in decline, and the ascendance of the Trump to the White House reinforced the perception. The Biden administration has tried to restore American role, American image, but the image and role have already damaged, and it takes time to restore the image. By partisan deadlock Americans' preoccupation elsewhere reinforce the perception that American supremacy in Asia is over. Second, I think it's because of the loss of strategic convergence or strategic trust between the two countries. Because Phnom Penh is of the view that Cambodia has never been in American strategic interest in Asia, and that the White House has always preferred other countries, especially Thailand and Vietnam, over Cambodia. So, given the fact that the perceived threats towards these two neighbors remain, it is quite hard for us to rely on the United States in our strategic direction. And I think this point responds to your question. Last but not least, I think it's because of the so-called trust deficit between Washington and Phnom Penh. And the trust deficit has been due to long historical legacies of American involvement in the region, in the Vietnam War, in Cambodian politics, sensitive issues in the bilateral relationship, especially on the promotion of American values in Cambodia, in which Cambodian leaders see certain double standards, if not hypocrisies, in Americans' efforts to promote those values. And now, this, I think, mistrust have been intensified because of allegations on the part of the United States on speculations related to Chinese military base in Cambodia. The United States have just punished 6 innocent students, Cambodian students, because of the tensions in the bilateral relationship. So the bilateral relationship have been very complicated. I think we need more energies, more time, and of course, goodwill to restore trust in order to promote a stable relationship between Cambodia and the United States. To me, Cambodian leaders are really keen to promote close relationship with the United States, especially Prime Minister Hun Sen himself. He has reiterated on many occasions a rhetoric that why it is so difficult to be a good friend of the United States. To me, that implies that he really wants to be a good friend of the United States. But diplomacy is a two-way traffic. Cambodia's desire cannot be possible without reciprocity from the United States as a superpower. So we need two to tango, in other words.
Thanks. There's one question. There's one question concerning that as well, with regards to the scholarship issues and the question on, is it possible to maintain independent and neutral foreign policy within the context of this kind of intensifying geopolitical rivalries where major powers force small states to take sides. So the question from the audience, is it possible to maintain our neutral and independent foreign policy?
It's thank you, the audience, for the question, and it's a very tough one. You know, neutrality, as I mentioned, is a very vague term, and countries that have successfully pursued the foreign policy based on neutrality and non-alignment are not many. Austria, Switzerland are good examples of countries that have successfully implemented neutrality. It is difficult because neutrality can be successful, must be guaranteed and supported by major powers. Without the assurance and support from major power, small states like ours cannot uphold neutrality and non-alignment, because at the end of the day, we might be forced to take side in a binary choice, either with us or against us. And I could sense the pressure on the Cambodian government at the moment, because of the increasingly sharpened geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China. In theory, I think the rivalry can be both opportunities and challenges. Opportunity is because of the fact that major powers need our support, and therefore they would provide economic assistance, political support for us in order to buy us. The challenge is that we might be forced to take side, and we have no choice but to take only one binary choice at the expense of other major power, and it's very risky. For what have been taking place, I believe that challenges have increasingly outweighed opportunities for Cambodia, because we can feel mounting pressures at the moment for us to take side. And for us, we don't want to take side. We are too small. We do not have any impact on great power competition. We just want to be independent, neutral, and to be able to pursue our development, and in order to alleviate poverty, promote social progress, to be a constructive player in the region and beyond. That's why I would like to repeat what member of parliament from the ruling party, His Excellency Suhyara, he wrote an open letter back, I think, in June 2019, by calling major powers to spare Cambodia from great power politics. And he pleaded all major power not to drag this post-conflict state into the global realpolitik again, because Cambodian people suffer more than enough as a victim of the global power rivalry of the Cold War. And please spare Cambodia from great power politics in the 21st century. It's quite hard, it depends on the support, assurance, and political will of major powers. Otherwise, we cannot maintain our neutrality and non-alignment.
Thank you. That's a question. I think I would like to clarify this also. What Dr. Borrell mentioned is that China is the most important strategic partner, but not the only partner, right? Is it correct? So
Yes.
that there's a misunderstanding, I think, question regarding to if China is not the most important, who else? But I think this is misunderstanding. I think what Dr. Borrell mentioned is China is the most important strategic partner, but not the only partner. Is it correct? Right? Okay. We have a few minutes left before we close our special dialogue on book launching on Cambodia-China strategy. So look into the future of Cambodia-China relations. What are the obstacles and what are the opportunities?
I think the main challenge in Cambodia-China relations is the fact that Cambodia might be dragged into a great power competition, as I mentioned to you early on. But the opportunities are wide open. I think all countries in the region and the world at large cannot ignore the rise of China. China's friends and foes alike are trying to benefit from the rise. Therefore, I think Cambodia has no choice but to continue to align carefully and smartly our interests with China's initiative, which I believe will serve our long-term national interests, economic development, social progress, and national security. But again, there are some red lines that we have to be well aware of and try to avoid. The red lines include we cannot let go our fundamental principles, anchoring on neutrality and non-alignment. So these are the principles of necessity, not of choice. So we need to continue to uphold those principles. And we need to emphasize to China and to other friends and partners alike that Cambodia, by the virtue of its constitution and its diplomatic tradition, cannot have any formal defense treaty or widely acknowledged informal pact with foreign countries. Number two, we cannot host permanent or semi-permanent military base or basing rights to any particular powers. Cambodia cannot join in a combat operation or significant alliance bureaucracy other than under the umbrella of the United Nations, especially UNPEO. So those are three no's that Cambodia will have to continue to make clear to all major powers, China, United States, Japan included. And I think that Cambodia and China should continue to promote their bilateral relationship to be the role model of a relationship between a small state and a great power, based on mutual respect, equal sovereignty, non-interference principle, and win-win cooperation. So the success of Cambodia, the success of China's initiative in Cambodia might help China to promote its soft power in other small states in the developing world. So it is in the interest not only of Cambodia, but also of China to promote the role model of the bilateral relationship based on the principles that I have alluded to. And I think China should understand Cambodia's geopolitical predicament as well. We wish to be a good friend of China and a good friend to many others as well. So we need more room for maneuver, and we need to play a more constructive role in the building of a open, inclusive, rules-based regional order that is in the interest of all countries in the region, China, Cambodia included. So these are my humble suggestions as far as future prospect of Cambodia's China relations are concerned.
Thank you. With that note, I would like to once again express our sincere appreciation to Dr. Chun Chan for sharing your key arguments and your perspective in more than 240 pages book, divided into 9 chapters, including introduction and conclusion. So I think 240 pages have been summarized in 1 hour, 10 minutes dialogue, which is very rewarding for us as the audience and future readers of your books. I have the privilege to read your book, and I found it very useful for those who interested in trying to understand Cambodia foreign policy in general and Cambodia-China relation in particular. So this book, I think it is a must-read book for those who study foreign policy of Southeast Asia or Cambodia foreign policy. And it should be read widely by the researcher, scholar, and policymaker alike. So once again, thank you, Dr. Chun Chan, and huge congratulations on your academic achievement. So please take note that Dr. Chun Chan talking to us today on his capacity as academic researcher and strategic advisor of the Asian Vision Institute. So thank you all for your interest and your participation in this dialogue. So I would like to close our dialogue today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.